To say that the discovery was unexpected would be one of the biggest understatements in all human history. It was morning on the idyllic Ibon Atoll, and a husband and wife, Russell and Demi, were busy processing the coconuts they dried for work, and they were disturbed by frantic shouting. They hurried down to the beach and found a skinny man with a thick, unruly beard and long hair dragging himself through the crashing surf. Unexpected guests are quite common in places like Ibon Atoll. Russell and Demi initially imagined the stranger had fallen off a passing cargo ship. They would subsequently learn, however, that the man was far stranger, speaking only Spanish and having no shared language with them. The Marshall Islands are one of the hardest places on Earth to visit, so remote that the United States tested 67 nuclear bombs there after World War II. Russell and Demi spent the following 3 days traveling by boat to Ibon Atoll's main town in search of help. The odd man who had appeared started to tell his story. The man, Jose Salvador Alvarenga, claimed to have got lost in a storm while fishing off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico, on November 17, 2012. He has been drifting ever since on a 23-foot skiff that was still bouncing around in the surf nearby. Considering that it's now early 2014, if Avarenga was telling the truth, he had been lost at sea on a tiny boat for a staggering 438 days. How is it possible for such a tiny boat to make it through the journey intact? Although the Mexican had a reasonable response to every query posed to him, how had Avarenga found enough food and water to sustain himself? Why hadn't he succumbed to scurvy in a matter of months without access to fruit and vegetables? What he was asserting simply didn't seem possible. Their narrative quickly gained popularity, and over the next few days, Avarenga was interrogated about every detail of it because the police were certain that he was lying. They had him take a polygraph test in order to plot the most likely course a tiny vessel let adrift after the Mexican coast would have taken. Experts and amateur explorers were invited to evaluate Alvarenga's descriptions of life at sea. An oceanographer began computer simulations on Pacific Ocean currents. The oceanographer's simulations predicted Alvarenga's skiff would have passed within 130 miles of Ibon Atoll, and the survivalist backed up his accounts of how he overcame the sea's many difficulties. The adventurers also concluded that Avarenga's experience of life on the Pacific Ocean matched their own. Avarenga's boss in Mexico was eventually reached, and he swiftly confirmed that an employee by the name of Jose Salvador Alvarenga had really vanished on November 17, 2012. After fitting all these puzzle pieces together on a boat with the registration matching the one currently moored of Ibon, the world's press was compelled to publish the most implausible piece. Avarenga Jose was telling the truth. Just over 14 months had passed, and a rounder, less hairy, the only minor inconvenience at this point was that his longtime fishing partner had pulled out of the trip at the last minute, so a replacement had to be found. The unfortunate soul was 23 years old, Jose Alvarenga. As far as he was concerned, it was a day like any other. Little did he know, as he stepped off the dock and onto his boat, he'd spent well over a year endlessly afloat. Ezekiel Cordoba, the trip got off to the perfect start, and before long the pair had landed a bumper catch of almost 500 kilograms of fresh fish. You could say it was all going smooth as butter, but then the weather changed. The two men had never met before, let alone worked, but of course they would soon have more than enough time to get to know one another. The boat is only a third the size and has a tenth of the equipment of Avarenga and Cordoba. The storm raged for a full 5 days, and its relentless waves destroyed the boat's engine and trashed every single piece of electronic equipment on board critically. That includes both the GPS and the two-way radio. Avarenga made the difficult decision to dump the lot overboard, considering the fact that the two men would soon be on the verge of starvation. I can only assume that decision haunted him for a very long time. A massive search and rescue operation was launched to try to find them, but the conditions were still difficult. The 23-foot skiff with no sails, no structures on the deck, and no lights of any kind was essentially invisible amid the towering waves. Avarenga had managed to send an SOS call to his boss on shore before the radio died, but with no way to pinpoint their location, it didn't help all that much. Avarenga and Cordoba spent the remainder of the storm in the skiff crouched inside the now empty icebox that had previously stored their catch when they emerged cold and fatigued. After 2 days of searching, the rescue operation was called off and the men were assumed dead. The two men took stock of their situation in the cold light of day 5 days later and quickly came to the conclusion that they were, to put it mildly, in a bad situation. They had dumped all of their food, had little water, their fishing gear had been swallowed by the ravenous waves, and everything that needed electricity to function was dead. Avarenga and Cordoba constructed a rain collection system using a bucket that miraculously survived the storm. They gradually improved the system over time with bottles and pieces of plastic that they collected from the ocean because their fishing gear had vanished and they had been without food for days. Avarenga developed a technique for catching fish with his bare hands. Avarenga would dangle his hands over the the edge of the skiff until a fish swam between them. To supplement this gourmet sashimi diet, the two men also caught seabirds and turtles that ventured too close to the boat. These animals came particularly in handy when the water supply was running low for a long period without rain. While drinking bird and turtle blood can't have been pleasant, it's just about better than dying. Dinner was served when the unfortunate creature was still wriggling. All that animal meat initially had advantages. When food was abundant and vitamin C was consumed in reasonably high quantities, scurvy's ravages were just about avoided. When things got tough, the two guys ate whatever they could get their hands on despite drying fish and meat in the sun on the boat's side. The greatest tragedy of the journey was caused by Cordoba's habit of necessity. After eating a dinner of raw seabird, he felt unwell, and it was quickly apparent why. The bird's stomach contained the partially eaten remains of a deadly sea serpent. Despite surviving the event, Cordoba started to completely avoid eating. 4 months into the expedition, his already precarious condition dramatically worsened, and he passed away. Avarenga had to deal with a much deadlier enemy after Ezekiel Cordoba passed away: complete isolation. At first, he couldn't bear the idea of being by himself in that desperate situation, so he kept Cordoba's body with him in the boat and talked to the corpse as if he were still alive for 6 days, chatting to the corpse while nature took its course until he finally realized he was going crazy. Jose Salvador Alvarenga spent 10 months alone in a small boat with nothing, but he managed to survive day after day, month after month. Then one morning, something strange awoke him. A flock of birds were circling overhead. Seabirds weren't an uncommon sight for Alvarenga. He'd killed his fair share over the previous 14 months, but these weren't like any seabirds he'd seen before. Alvarenga struggled to get to his feet and saw it land there in the distance. As bad as things had been for Jose Salvador Alvarenga, the moment of falling onto the beach and feeling the sand between his fingers must have been one of the most exquisite experiences ever for him. He dove headfirst into the water. Minutes later, the waves tossed his battered body onto the beach. It seems a bit ridiculous to refer to Jose Alvarenga as lucky, but it's important to note that Aben Atoll is the only land for at least 100 miles in any direction. The island Alvarenga happened to land on was smaller than a football field, completely uninhabited, and a few meters separated from the north. It was there that Russell and Emmy heard his cries, bringing our story full circle. It's difficult to summarize a story like Jose Salvador Alvarenga because it's one of those things the human brain simply isn't capable of comprehending, like the size of the universe or the cost of beer in London. If his path had just been a few miles of the north or south, he'd have drifted clean past it, and the next stop would have likely been the Philippines, more than 3,000 miles away. Thanks for watching. Jose Salvador Alvarenga's 438 days at sea rank among the most amazing journeys and survival feats ever accomplished by a person. Jose Salvador Alvarenga's 438 days at sea rank among the most incredible journeys and survival feats ever accomplished by a person. Have a good day.